Because, Luella,
Okay.
we don't get along with each other. I mean, how many families are arguing with each other? This we only hurt the ones we love, the ones we shouldn't hurt at all, and we
Mm-hmm.
do that all the time. And trying to be able to stay out of hurting somebody you care about
Mm-hmm.
because you haven't resolved something yourself. Uh, a lot of the fun is with
Mm-hmm.
relationships. A lot of the fun is being able to like get to know somebody, and that person gets to know you, and you form that connection with each other, however temporary. Uh, and sometimes they go on a little longer, but I mean that's part of the fun, and that's part of the problem is people don't get along with each other too much, and I'm trying to use coincidence as a psychotherapeutic tool, as like psychotherapy by synchronicity is another way of saying it.
Welcome to I Think I Can podcast. My name is Luella Young. I am a woman who believes that we, like wine, get better with age. Age brings us wisdom, intuition, and a level of sophistication that is beyond the reach of youth. I am here to tell you that living a luxuriously rich and fulfilling life is in your reach. I Think I Can podcast will teach you to think differently in order to get different results. Allow me to show you how to do life effortlessly. This podcast is for the woman who is tired of playing by the rules of society, community, religion, parents, and partners. I Think I Can is all about becoming brave, authentic, purposeful, and strong. Listen weekly, and you will find yourself living a life you could have only once dreamed of. Thoughts drive our physiology, so channel your thoughts with me into a life truly worth living. Enjoy the show. Welcome back, everyone, to I Think I Can podcast. Today, I am absolutely delighted that Dr. Bernard Beitman has graciously allowed me to interview him today. He is the first psychiatrist since Carl Jung to I knew I was going to have problems with this word. System.
Systematize.
Thank you. Systematize the study of coincidences. It's a very interesting topic. He is a graduate of Yale Medical School. He did his psychiatry residency at Stanford University. Very impressive. He is also the former chair of psychiatry at the University of Missouri Columbia Medical School for 17 years. And he writes a blog for Psychology Today on coincidence and is also the co-author of the award-winning book Learning Psychotherapy. So you can see how I'm again very excited about having him here today. He is also the founder of the Coincidence Project, and he lives in Charlottesville, Virginia. And today we are going to talk mainly about a wonderful book that he wrote called Meaningful Coincidences: How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. Um, so, why don't we first define uh, how do you define meaningful coincidence?
You got to define coincidence and then go to meaningful.
Mhm,
Um, the word coincidence tends to be a neutral term,
mhm.
suggesting that maybe the two events that come together may or may not have a possible explanation.
Okay.
They can be surprising. A meaningful coincidence, on the other hand, is something that the person who's experiencing the coincidence feels is not just surprising, but also somehow has some personal relevance, and for some of us, also maybe a clue to how reality works.
Okay. All right. Well, I on the preface of the book, you have a quote, "The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return," song by Nat King Cole. Why did you why did you place that quote there at the right at the beginning?
Because it's really hard to do that.
Exactly.
It's really
Exactly.
hard to do that. There's a lot there's a lot of problems like what is love?
Mm-hmm.
Um, for one thing, it's a bunch of things really. Uh, and maybe there's a basic love. And to love somebody um, is sometimes easier than to recognize that that person is loving you. And to be
Mm-hmm.
able to be in a relationship where you know, feel with all parts of yourself, to know that you love someone with your heart and with your soul and with your mind, and also that that person loves you in almost the same way, but in my case, in her way of doing all that, to know that, to feel that is a remarkable interpersonal achievement, but that a lot of people don't ever get to.
Well, beautifully said. And I think that's, my mission in life is to really send that out there to people that it is possible. Um, and You're right. Sometimes people have a real difficulty receiving love just as much as they do, giving love. So actually, can I ask you, in terms of meaningful coincidence, um, would you say you and your wife, how long have you been married?
Um, been married 40 years, but my wife and I are separated, and
Okay.
we'll stay separated.
Okay. And did you find new love?
Yeah.
Okay. How about meaningful coincidence in terms of those two relationships? Can you bring that into the relationships or no? Like, can
So,
you?
hey, you're talking to Dr. Coincidence, you know.
Yeah.
You know, um,
Yes.
that's what we say, you know, um, that uh, my life has been a bunch of those things. Uh, I was for the person that was married to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was we met on an airplane. We had assigned seats back then, um, and that started it. So
Right.
we were assigned seats, and I was married briefly before that, and that was an introduction uh, by a then movie star who had come to medical school um, because of a letter. So one of the guy on the same floor of my dormitory had written to her, and I loved her movie. I loved what she was in the movie, so I kind of went down and said hi to her, and she said, "Have I got a girl for you?" And so that one was, and she turned out to be the daughter of a past president of the American Psychoanalytic Association. And I
Whoa.
got into psychotherapy and I got to see psychoanalysis from the inside rather than the PR they talk about it. So yeah, those two were very coincidental.
Yes, exactly. And this current relationship you have?
Um, that was just that wasn't as coincidental. We were both in the same meeting, um, and she was trying to meet people there and told me and so other people too, let's have lunch together. And we had lunch, and really just coffee. She didn't have anything, and
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. It that could be a whole other, I think, episode. But I just really love the quote because it's like you said, it's the most beautiful gift there is. And
It's
then
and you don't know it until you find it. You just the closest I got to it was like um how important can it be that I've tasted other lips? The important thing is here and now and the magic of our kiss. So I learned about romance from romance songs like that. And so I got an idea about it, but it was like the real thing is a little bit more, it's more three-dimensional.
yes, exactly. Well, the and then the next couple sentences, like I have to admit, like it just like it cracked me up. Like I was reading it in bed and I just like laughed out loud because you write, please allow me to introduce myself. I am a psychiatrist. I am paid to distinguish between reality and crazy. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so true. I mean, not um, you know, whatever demeaning like, mental health or emotional health and but it's so true. It's we try our best, right? And yeah. So, okay, now maybe for the listeners, do we um can we strengthen our intuitive muscles with practice? Like with this whole idea of, you know, meaningful coincidence. Like I also, when I heard you being interviewed um in a past podcast by another host, I was just like, I remember listening to your dog about to your story about Snapper, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I was like so sad when I heard that story. Can you give that story, or can you tell our listeners that story? And then maybe would you say an answer, like would that be your first like sense of a meaningful coincidence?
Oh,
As
definitely.
okay. Okay.
Definitely. It was, that's what my book, Meaningful Coincidences, the covers on the
Mhm.
door there, is dedicated to Snapper and my
Yes.
father.
I saw that. Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
that's why I'm doing this, because of him and
Okay.
him. Um, so
Okay.
I was 8 or 9, and I rode my bicycle home from school, and I got to the driveway, and my mother was standing in the doorway, and I said, "Hey, Ma, where's Snapper? Because he's usually hanging around in the front or something." And he wasn't there. So she said, "Go to the police station, and maybe they know." And I've told this story a few times now, and I keep I keep wondering how come my mother came up with that.
Yeah, see, that was the first thing I thought of too. Yeah.
Well, you're a therapist. How come you think she came up with that?
I I guess, oh, let me think about this for a second. I don't know. Like I like in my mind I'm kind of thinking it was somewhat cruel way of saying that, our the dog is lost. Um was she trying to teach you to be, your own sort of detective and maybe some independence? I don't know. Do you know?
No, I don't know.
That's why you're asking me.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
we never talked about it. All I know is what happened, and then I've gotten into telling the story a bunch of times. So like, there's my mother standing in the doorway, and she says, "Go to the police station. Maybe they know." And the couple of answers I've gotten, one, she was a refugee like my father from Nazi Germany, and
mm,
they had, and somebody suggested that maybe the police know everything, so maybe they knew this.
Mm.
I kind of don't think so. But somebody else, an intuitive, psychic kind of person, said maybe she had a lot of confidence in your ability to find him.
Yeah. I mean, that did go through my mind too. Is it's sort of like almost she had some in like intuitive guidance and like as you just said, but sort of like lead yourself and you will be led or something like that. It's sort of yeah, it's a very different response. So there must be some sort of meaningful coincidence to it. So,
Well, I think you were starting to talk about intuition, and I think you're right. My
mhm.
mother cooked by feel.
Hmm.
That's how she didn't
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
well, she just did it intuitively. She had some idea about what to do, and then would do it. And that's the way I cook too. It's like I like putting together stuff and see what happens.
Y-
And so a
yeah.
lot of times it comes out all right. So I think sure. I think you're pointing out her own intuition, and
Hmm.
to add that I was when I was born, I was a prince to her, and was that way for all my life, really, and many
Mm-hmm.
other variations on that. So it was like I was the first son, and it was like my first child, and that may have something to do with it too. She had confidence in me, but uh, I always thought she blew it. she she was supposed to keep an eye on him, and he was gone, so she was delaying. That's kind of like what I
Mm,
thought, and when I thought back about it, what she was doing. So I don't know. Knowing the mind of my mother has been like a task for me. That's part of the reason I became a therapist too. Try
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know that when the white sheep of the family trying to I tried to do therapy on my mother. It didn't work. There's,
No.
there's a problem. There's a problem there called countertransference and something and
Yeah.
transference. Uh, so I got on my bike and went back across the blacktop of our elementary school, just the way I had come home. And I still remember the name of the car dealership that I passed, named Benny Blauschild's Cars. Uh, and I went across the grass to the big road. Now that's a big road. I mean, it was had a divider down the middle and two lanes on one side and two lanes on the other side,
Hmm.
um, with and what was called a rapid transit trolley car thing that was going running down the middle of it. And I never crossed it before, but I knew where the police station was and did cross at the light and went over to the police station and parked my bike, climbed up a bunch of stairs and more stairs, and there was this big door. I mean, I can almost feel how big it was, and like
Hmm.
uh, somehow I pushed it open, and there was this big desk and this big man behind the desk, and there's me looking up at him, and and um
Mm.
and have you seen my dog? Have
Mm.
you seen my dog? And he said, no, I haven't seen your dog. And that was a, a devastating moment for me because I really needed him.
Mhm.
He was for a lot of reasons, but he was my buddy, um, my friend, my a lot of things. And so I got back on my bike, and instead of going back the way I'd come, I was just crying so much that I just kept pedaling down this down the side of the street. Um, oh, and I looked up, and there was this dog coming at me with, and he was walking like Snapper didn't walk with his like two legs behind him. He walked like this
Like an
at
angle.
an angle. Oops, and he had an angle for each one of them, for his front and his back. And I said, "That's Snapper." And yeah, we got closer, and it was. And he jumped up on my leg, and I like to say that I thought he was saying because he was not that enthusiastic. I mean, he jumped up my leg, but it wasn't the enthusiastic greeting I expected.
Right.
And I thought he said something like, "Where have you been?"
Mm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
went back home. I don't remember how. I think we. I don't remember how we went back home.
Mm-hmm.
And Snapper, to get to where he was, had to do 4 different turns from our house. He had four
Gosh.
different turns, and he had to cross the big road too, further down. So he did four. I only had one that I made a wrong turn on, but I was still going someplace I hadn't been before. So in a
Mm-hmm.
way, I was doing some turns too, but I kind of knew where I was going for a while, except for the last part of it. And that was the beginning because uh, as I see every time almost I tell this story, it was like I can still feel when that policeman said, "I don't know where your dog is," and the utter devastation I felt without him,
Mm-hmm.
just without him. So he was there, and he stayed with me for quite a while afterwards.
Mm. No, it's such a beautiful story. It's a heart-wrenching story. Like I just like a little boy like that, and like you say, like crossing a big busy street, and it's, I mean, we can't even compare it to nowadays where we can't let our child outside the house, but like for your mom back then, yeah, it was thanks for sharing that. And you should probably maybe share the one other story, like you say you dedicated it to Snapper and your father. So tell us a story about your father.
Um, I was 31 years old, and it was San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
It was 11 p.m. San Francisco time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was standing at the sink in our Victorian house that I was sharing with another guy, and I was choking. I mean, I'm part of the reason I'm coughing is because I'm kind of remembering that, and
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get, I couldn't get, I couldn't get whatever it was in my throat out. Um, and I kept choking and choking and choking, and finally it stopped. I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then next morning, my brother called and said our father had died in Wilmington, Delaware at 2 a.m. Wilmington, Delaware time, which is 11 o'clock San Francisco time. And so I experienced what my father was experiencing because he had choked on his own blood. He bled into his throat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He bled
Mm-hmm.
into his throat and died choking on his own blood. So I was experiencing what he was experiencing. And being the curious fellow that I am, I said, "Hey, maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe there are other people who do this too."
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
indeed, my research and other research suggests that there's a lot of stories. I mean, people have stories like this all the time, but
Oh,
they don't tell them because it's crazy.
right.
But
Right.
it ain't crazy if a lot of people are doing it, and they're not crazy. Oh, we can get into how you define that, but
Right.
this is an experience of simultaneously feeling the pain of a loved one or distress of a loved one at a distance from where you are, and
Mm-hmm.
this happens
Mm-hmm.
in our research. It happens sometimes to a lot of people.
To a lot of people. Now, would you say these people, you know, are intentionally like once, like, so how would you say that? Like, let's say we all experience this at some moment of our lives, and I almost think we do, but would you say the difference between those who sense it more and those who do not are the ones that say I'm open and sort of willing to be to live my life very intuitively, or to be guided through spirit. I mean, you talk about, we all have individual minds, but all of these minds are connected to become more of a universal mind. So those that are feeling more of these instances in their lives, would you say that they have, surrendered to that idea and to connect on that level?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Okay. Okay. So at the same time, then, like, have you seen how, like, maybe even with yourself, that if you're open and willing for this, can you practice this? Can you be get better at this if you're willing to be open to this?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Um Now you talk about, and like as I look down, because I've had lots of little notes here made in your book, in chapter 4, like when you talk about coincidence, like sensitivity, like in the research that you did, um you saw that there was 5 personality traits that were most common in these individuals that where you're doing your research. One being referential thinking. Can you maybe touch briefly on these personality traits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, it's our first look at this was finding that people who said they were spiritual
Yeah.
were more likely to have a lot of coincidences, and people who said they were religious, little fewer, but still a lot more than people who said they didn't say they were religious. So those are the two characteristics that we
Mhm.
found first. But then we got a little bit more fine grained in looking at personality, and we found that people who were self-referential were also very likely, compared to those who were less so, to report coincidences. And self-referential means looking around and there's some people talking among themselves over there, and you think they're talking about you.
Mm.
So what's going on over there is like about
Mhm.
you. So it
Mhm.
refers to you. And
Mhm.
I got a kick out of somebody that I kind of know at dance, walking by, goes into the bathroom, and I talk with two other people here that about her name and how it goes back 5, 6 generations and stuff. And then she walks back, and I know she's shy. So I said, your worst fear has just taken place. We were talking about you. And she just howled at that. And that got us into a deep conversation, the two
Mhm.
of us. The other two left because we were really going for it about
Yeah.
what we were talking
Yeah.
about this 5 generational thing.
Mm.
But that's playing with the idea that you're
Mhm.
thinking people are talking about you. Because
Mhm.
sometimes they are. That's what's funny.
Mhm. Well, I mean, wouldn't that also be like, I mean, if you had some sort of connection, like I know like a lot of spiritual people have, different like signs that they see, like they're more connected to, let's say, like a naturalist would be like a butterfly or a blue jay, and when that blue jay lands in your backyard, you would self-referential thinking would be, oh, they're visiting me, rather than, oh, there's a blue jay in my backyard.
Oh, that's
Would that
true. I hadn't quite put it that way. That's right.
okay.
Absolutely. Very
Okay.
good.
Okay. And other personality traits?
Yeah. People who are high in seeking meaning in life,
Mhm.
because again, it's looking out there for what might be relevant for my life. So they're
Mhm.
out there looking.
Mhm. Mhm.
Another more general one is being high emotion, not too high. Could
Mm.
be depression, but more likely anxiety
Mm.
uh, and more likely anxiety, but also feeling really good too.
Mhm.
The world is my oyster. People used to say it's like it's all
Mm.
for me.
Mhm.
And the people who are anxious are looking for ways to get out of the anxiety. So when your mind is going fast, when it's thinking a lot of stuff, you got more likelihood of being able to match what you're thinking with what's going on around you, because you have more stuff to match with what's around you. When you're
Yeah.
depressed, a bipolar patient was telling me that when he's depressed, he doesn't have many coincidences, and it's when he's manic, he has lots of them, because of the same thing.
Mm.
There's a lot of thoughts here
Mm.
that can be matched out there in the environment.
Mm. And before you go on to the next one, like one, can I just ask you, like, the term empath, that's brought up a lot to me. Like, it's sort of like, well, I'm an empath, so I take up everybody's energy. Would you say that there are such, like, there's such a thing, an empath? And is this an empath really the person that allows themselves to feel the spectrum of emotions? Because I think, saying what you just did, like someone who allows themselves to feel very, very sad, and that person that also allows themselves to feel very, very happy are taking that risk, right? They're not playing it safe and being neutral. They're taking that risk in life and feeling all of the emotions. um yeah, what's your views on empath and that
Well, empath
term?
usually means to me feeling what somebody else is feeling,
Yeah, yeah.
and that can be a problem. And I think I've got this cough and this cold because I have, under the right conditions, boundaries that allow negative emotion to get into me and then stir me up. It happened one Friday night at the parking lot at the local high school, which is nice to say, hanging around with some friends of mine that I didn't know very well, and somebody didn't that I did not know. I was surprised to see, and there was a lot of emotion that I didn't realize going on there. A lot of surprise. I was tired, so I think I picked up
Mm,
feeling around me from two people I didn't know, one person I didn't know very well. But I was had this idea that I might have been a victim of energy vampires. I,
mm,
Energy vampires are people who steal energy from you.
mhm,
Now, I'm kind of an energy vampire myself. I just like to give it back.
mhm,
I like to exchange it,
mhm,
and I go to dance pretty regularly, and there's a lot of great energy there, and I pick it up, but I try to give it back. I
mhm,
think the two people I didn't know very well, particularly one of them, um, hugged me, and I hugged them, and the 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 hugging was so delightful with the woman who I had hugged with before, and a really nice thing,
mhm,
but there was something more about it this time. And this was
mhm,
her boyfriend who was there, I hadn't met. And he hugged me and he said, "Oh, you have such great energy. You have such great energy." And then they started to leave, and then he came back to hug me some more. And it was almost like he was taking the energy from me that was there.
mm,
Um, and he was a sensitive guy, I could tell that. So he was just going where the energy was, and I know her better, and she goes where the energy was. And it was late for me at night, and it was a little cold out there. So
mhm,
I think that my
mm,
being an empath has its problems, as you probably well know. You can
mhm.
pick up too much stuff, or even
Yeah,
be taken advantage of,
yeah,
which I think is what
absolutely.
happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you, in that reflection, how would you caution someone, like, what would be a preventative measure of that, right? Like, because it's sort of done, and in reflection now you see, is there anything that you can think of that would allow ourselves to uphold our boundaries there, and, like,
The
would,
best thing is not get into the situation.
right?
The best thing is get, because it was for me late. It
Yeah.
was dark. I was in a place that I hadn't been before, with people
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't been before. So it was almost like I was in a vulnerable position.
Yeah.
So the issue is not to get into a situation like that,
Right.
and because by that time it was a little too late. So be careful about the places you put yourself and with people and the potential vulnerabilities that you might have.
Yeah, no, that's important. I think what you're saying there is when, as they say, when your spidey senses are saying, like, listen, like, I think what you're just speaking about, intuition, it's sort of follow that gut feeling and yeah, listen to the quiet voice. You don't, and that's the thing, right? Like, you don't have to explain why. You just have to say, I just, something's telling me, like, it's probably right. And you give those examples, in the book too, I think, more or less about where a voice is saying, turn right, or like maybe don't go down this detour, or like whatever that might be. It's just to practice listening to that. Um, but you have to do that only when your mind is healthy and quiet, I suppose.
Right.
Hmm. So, okay, other personality traits?
Well, intuition is one you'd think
Okay.
fits.
Mhm.
And again, all this is like using standardized questionnaires of self-reporting. And our measure of intuition did not correlate with increased coincidence frequency, but another group, I think in Arizona, had used a different intuition scale from the one we had used, and they found a correlation. It's intuitively you think intuition would have something to do with it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, we don't define intuition very well. Intuition is like a grab bag of a lot of stuff, meaning, hey, I know this, but I don't know how I know this. But there's all kinds of ways that we know stuff in ways that aren't rational, that we
Yeah.
can't really justify except try to justify. So
Yeah.
intuition needs a lot more study, and there are more people writing books about intuition now too. So
Mhm.
it's a good thing to get more detailed about the various elements of intuition. And you mentioned some of them: the gut feeling,
Mhm.
the small voice that you might hear.
Mhm.
There's also this one called your heart,
Yeah.
and following your heart is probably a little harder than the gut and the thought thing, because it's kind of like the heart just has a more beating has a beat way of saying things.
Mm,
Just boom, boom. It's not. It hasn't. It's like
right.
it's hard to interpret sometimes. So you got to listen more carefully to your heart and what it's trying to tell you. So those are three parts of it, and another one is just I felt like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very hard to define, like, because even the personality trait of curiosity, sort of like, I was wondering if you sort of measure, how some people are just very curious. It's sort of, hey, let's go to this whatever tonight. Um, oh no. But like some people are just more curious, it's sort of, yeah, I wouldn't mind checking that out, and I don't know. Um,
Yes, you do. Curiosity is a variable in people,
hmm,
uh, and the trouble with you curious people is you get in trouble because curiosity sometimes gets that cat into a little problem. You can't go down certain dark alleys. And I did that on this Friday when I got sick. I really shouldn't have been
mm-hmm,
out there like that, but I was curious. I was trying to like see what
mm-hmm,
was going to happen, and seeing what's going to happen is like is part of being curious because you're not going to be able to discover things unless you get banged on the nose every once in a while because
mm,
you got to know where you can go and where you're not going to go. And I've been having to think about this illness of mine,
mm-hmm,
which really hasn't been too bad. I mean, I had guests over the weekend. I've been to the gym and I've done,
mm-hmm,
but yesterday I was like, just
mm-hmm.
didn't do anything. It was really nice. It was a great American Thanksgiving, just watching television most of the day.
Mhm,
And some great stuff for me. I had time to watch. So it's trying to be able to recognize when you can do something and then learn from it as I am learning. And what I learned best was that I volunteered to do a podcast on a Friday night. And Friday night at 8 o'clock, I'm usually at dance. And I really kind of resented having to do this, and I shouldn't have done it. And these guys only had 8 views of me with them on their YouTube thing. It really wasn't worth it. So I was trying to compensate for not going to dance by doing something else. And that got me into the coughing thing that you heard a little bit about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. But yeah, I think what you're saying, it's sort of like don't do like still be curious, but realize that this might be a method of learning some life lessons. But that's the way we grow and evolve, and we can't be scared about learning these life lessons. It's just reflective thought is always a great way to go.
That's so
And
important. So
yeah,
important what you're saying, Luella. Um, it's so important that
yeah,
that getting sick, um, having things not work out well, um, those are all potential learning experiences for those of us who, in our own way, know that planet Earth is Earth University for many of us, but we're trying to figure out what's going on around here.
mm-hmm,
And what are we doing here? I mean, it's the same old
mm-hmm,
age-old questions, and meaningful coincidences help us answer some of those questions.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely has. So, and one thing also, like, I mean, maybe this is one, psychotherapist to another here, but like in chapter 10, when you talked about coincider types and you mentioned, psychotherapy, it says your problems walk into your office. That was one of your colleagues had said to you. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so true. Right. And, again, you can talk about law of the attraction or energy attracts like energy, but it's just so true. You don't specifically, ask for these type of clients to come to you. It's just it's like, God, universe, nature, whatever. It's their way of helping you work through your own problems, um, in many ways.
Being a therapist is the only way to be in therapy without being a patient.
Yeah, exactly. Free therapy for all. Um, but like, how would you say like the whole idea of law of attraction then and like energy and being on similar frequency, like this all ties in as well? Like, I mean, this whole because you do like the universal mind that you talk about. I mean, do you relate that into sort of quantum physics? Like, um,
I have this bad boy tendency of reacting against what everybody thinks is the great idea. I mean,
okay.
I recognize that in myself.
You're a
It's
rebel.
just instinctively because I have somehow know that if everybody says this is how it all works, it isn't how it all works. It's like there's something missing here in
Mm-hmm.
what they're talking about, and quantum really comes down to non-locality, and non-locality isn't very well explained.
Mm-hmm.
I took me a while to understand what that meant. It meant that it ain't where you are; it's happening someplace else. But uh, I can talk to somebody someplace else, and that's kind of local. But no, it isn't. But there's no obvious connection between, and obvious is a big problem with this, but the non-locality comes from putting uh, pairing a pair of photons or pair of electrons, and getting them entangled with each other is no small task. Everybody, if you look at how you get a photon or electrons entangled, it's a big deal to get them entangled, and then you separate them a zillion miles from each other, and you change the spin on one of them. Its spin isn't really that; it's something like it, but you change the
Mm-hmm.
spin on one, and the other one spins in the opposite direction. They do it simultaneously, faster than the speed of light, and that's captured a lot of people's imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true. This is what happens to entangled particles. But then there's more to argue about it. But I just want to be able to at least for what at this point, we're talking about we're talking about with quantum or quantum
Mhm.
fields. I'm just I'm just an ex-football player, played some rugby in, in medical school and at San Francisco, and I just like to know where my feet are on the ground. I mean, so I've come up with the idea of the psychosphere. It's not that there isn't something greater than the psychosphere, which I think of as our mental atmosphere, and I think this mental atmosphere surrounds Earth, and in this mental atmosphere, it's our thoughts, our feelings, but also those of animals and plants
Mhm.
in this thing. And also, a lot of history is stored in this thing, and we have access to it. And it's becoming a way that I'm trying to explain telepathy rather than
Mhm.
having, well, I don't know, maybe it's quantum mechanics, and then you say, well, how does that work? And then you go, well, there's a lot of space between the atoms in everything, so there's a lot of space, so it really is all space that we're in. Okay, yeah, okay, but how does it happen that I think think of somebody I haven't thought of for a long time, and they contact me?
I know.
Yes. So how am I getting their thought about me, or am I thinking about them, triggering them to call me, or something? But this is one of the most common, meaningful coincidence there is. Telephone telepathy is one way of describing it. Now it's texting and other ways, Instagramming, but it's still
Mhm.
communicating with each other. So the psychosphere is a way for me to be able to offer a model. Nobody's got a good one. There are all kinds of
Mhm.
hard ones to understand for how telepathy might work. So I think instead of asking the universe,
Mhm.
and I look up the definition of universe. Well, it's all the comets and asteroids and constellations and galaxies and all the stuff that we know astronomers pay attention to.
Mhm.
But the universe is expanding faster than our telescopes can find them. It's faster than the speed of light. So how do
Mhm.
you know what you're talking about? Okay, so you look
Mhm.
up a second definition of the universe, and it sounds very much like God.
Mm.
People use universe as a substitute for God, consciousness, the
Mhm.
greater
Mhm.
mind. It's a
Mhm.
unified mind, the one mind. It's all
Mhm.
God in disguise. And hey, I like to think of not Lucy in the Skies with Diamonds. That one. I like to think of all us living creatures and not just us egocentric human beings are God in disguise. That we are
Mhm.
consciousness kind of separated off from the greater mind, and that we're trying to figure out who we are by recognizing that we're part of something greater. But in between, there's us chickens trying to have a good time here on Earth. I mean, this is what gets me mad about everything going on around here is like we could be having a lot more fun than what a lot of people are generating around here because it can be fun having a body and smelling stuff and petting dogs and running around in the woods and going to dance. There's all kinds of fun things to do and learning stuff because it's a real
Mhm.
interesting place. So
Mhm.
I'm trying to use meaningful coincidences as a way to alert people to like the playground that is Earth and that we're destroying it. And I see that meaningful coincidences can be a help in uh, in doing something about global warming and other things as well.
Oh yeah, and that's a really nice way of sort of defining like your message in terms of writing this book and the purpose of this book. And yeah, I think you're speaking a little bit about, we as humans, we're constantly trying to find again meaning in things. So even like even describing, you know, universe and the law of attraction, and I mean it gives us some solace, some peace, thinking that they're, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And now we can kind of pack it up and put it on the shelf and not think about it anymore. Otherwise, it can become, yeah, like I feel like myself personally, like I have such a curious mind. I'm always trying to, you know, get some sort of answer, and it's a blessing and a curse at the same time because it's exhausting. Like sometimes I just like some days I just feel like I'm okay, I'm thinking way too much, and but it's not anxiety. It's just sort of like, and I think maybe what you're like, but it's I think it's also beautiful because I'm um even though it's exhausting, I am playing in the playground. I am like I love the way you describe that. Everything from petting my dog to enjoying delicious food to smelling fresh air. I mean, why don't we just enjoy it? We're here, you know, for a good time, possibly not a long time. So let's just enjoy it instead of, um, yeah, I don't know, criticizing, blaming, judging, etc. So,
Because, Luella,
okay.
we don't get along with each other. I mean, how many families are arguing with each other? This we only hurt the ones we love, the ones we shouldn't hurt at all, and we
Mm-hmm.
do that all the time. And trying to be able to stay out of hurting somebody you care about
Mm-hmm.
because you haven't resolved something yourself. A lot of the fun is with
Mm-hmm.
relationships. A lot of the fun is being able to like get to know somebody, and that person gets to know you, and you form that connection with each other, however temporary. Uh, and sometimes they go on a little longer, but I mean that's part of the fun, and that's part of the problem is people don't get along with each other too much, and I'm trying to use coincidence as a psychotherapeutic tool, as like psychotherapy by synchronicity is another way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I never thought about that before. Psychotherapy by synchronicity. Expand on that a little bit, and maybe, um, like if you feel that's enough, like just to expand on it. But like, I think there was a part also that you were talking about grief, and like I just want to mention that because it you said grief, it doesn't only affect brain function but also our self-identity, and that was
Yeah,
really interesting.
yeah, yeah, because we're defined by our relationships, and someone, I mean, it's like with my dog, getting if I get connected with somebody with that kind of depth, um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I think about losing her, it starts becoming already it's becomes a very difficult thing because now I'm beginning to be able to think of myself in a relationship with someone who loves me and I love her, and we both know it, and it's so weird because I haven't had that really ever, and then to think about her not being around is like changes who I think I'm becoming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely, and we hear about it all the time. Oh, they're a different person now. They're a
You're a
different
different
person.
person. You're a different person, and the way to think about that, the way I think about it, is like since I'm partially defined by my relationships,
Mm-hmm.
when one of those relationships goes away, uh, I don't know who I
Mm-hmm.
am as much as I did before when that relationship was there. So my brain and my mind have to go through a a healing process because it's like there's a rip or a wound in my mind brain that has to be repaired so that I can be
Mm-hmm.
okay without the gap of that person being gone.
Mm-hmm. Have you discovered the best way of doing that because you've had to go through it, yourself, like with your dog or with another human being?
I would refer to Catherine Shear, uh, M. Catherine Shear, a psychiatrist colleague of mine who can help with unresolved grief. She's written about it. She's done the research about it.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got some good stuff. But for the simple way I think about it is, you're not who you thought you were before,
No.
and you it's going to be hard to find who you are now, as that a part of you, literally part of your definition of self, dissolves. You have to be able to be something different from what you were before. And how do you, that's where you try to get to, but how you do that, um, I'm not very good at being able to say.
No, but like, would you say you still feel Snapper? I mean, it's you don't have Snapper with you on the physical plane,
Yeah,
but
he's in the woods with me sometimes.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Speak. Actually, that's a great segue about how you connect with nature. I thought that was quite fascinating too, and it just makes so much sense. But can you describe that regarding the trees?
Well, if you allow yourself, um, to go out and out into the forest, to like just hang around, you might find yourself resonating, feeling like you're on the same wavelength. Somehow it feels good, um, with some aspect of the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And about 10 years ago, I was walking in a new forest near Charlottesville, where I am now, and I kind of got stopped by these two trees. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't really tell you how it happened, but I just felt an energy thing from the trees as I was passing them, and I turned to look at them. And since we have now have a relationship, it's been going on 10 years. Me, the trees, and then it took me 5 years to see there was a third tree uh, behind these two. The king is to my right, on my right, and the queen is to my left, and their child or something is in between or something. Well, I don't know. Still trying to figure out that one.
Mm.
And we have a relationship. And uh, the other day I was up there having a conversation with the trees, and I realized how crazy I looked as someone walked by because I didn't see her coming. And
Mm.
what's he doing? Because I was talking with the trees. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
was doing. But that's not the way people think people are supposed to act. But the trees are conscious. They're beings that are can communicate with us, and birds as well. A friend of
Mm-hmm.
mine is big with birds. So we're good friends. She's helping me with the coincidence project. Juliet Trail's her name. So she's got the birds and I got the trees. So they kind of like go together that way. Uh, and we have a mutual friend who loves trees, and that's makes us have a little family together, kind of, within nature as a central part of what we do. And if you go out in the forest and you open to the idea of the potential communication from some of the beings out there in the forest, you may be surprised. If you may be surprised what you come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that another key word is being open. Being open for this. Um, yeah, kind of having the faith without evidence. Sometimes I call it too trusting. Like belief, trust, and faith are some of the most important, I think, values that you can, hone in life.
I don't know that I have to believe in
Mm.
without evidence. Uh, I'd like to I like to have evidence. If I at least
Okay.
the evidence
Well,
that
see,
works.
that's a scientist coming in you, though.
Well, it should be for everybody. You don't have to be a scientist to know that if you touch a hot stove, it's gonna hurt, and you're gonna back away from it. It's just like you learn through experience. That's evidence that the stove is a problem. The trees, I have a conversation. I didn't believe I was talking with the trees, and so one of the funny things happened was, like I said, I say, I don't believe I'm talking with you. I'm saying that to them, and they say, that young woman at dance. What do you think? Which is more likely, that she really likes you, or you're talking to us? And I said, more likely that I'm talking to you. So they got me on that. They get me on a bunch of. They told me to introduce two people, then they're very good friends. And I'm friends with each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's so they they give it they give information out that's interesting. They seem to be helpful. I get into trances with them, and I don't remember what happens. So I mean, it's like it
Mm.
you got to have. It's just like, how do I know you exist? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because other people tell me you exist, that helps.
Mm-hmm.
And I see your name someplace. Luella,
Mm-hmm.
okay, she's there, and she's
Mm-hmm.
making nodding things, so she looks like she's real. Um, but I need the evidence to confirm it is pretty fast. With the trees, you gotta like you gotta
Okay.
like be open for the information. And just one other little example. I'm gonna have to go in a bit.
Yep.
Um, uh, that one other example is one of the problems is like bugs. A lot of people get bugged by bugs.
Yeah.
And out in the forest, I got a swarm of bugs. One of them got into my eye, and I didn't like that. So there are good bugs and there are bad bugs. By a river near my house here in Charlottesville, there was another swarm of bugs, and I was like, okay, I got to be careful with you guys. So I was lying down, and they stayed a distance from me, and I got a little more trusting of them. They got a little closer. They got a little closer, and they started forming a rectangle. And I was wondering how they could be swarming around and form a rectangle. They're moving, but yet holding that shape.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, okay, I'm going to go like this to see if I can stretch you out into a different rectangle. It was kind of a square. Now make it into a longer lined, a longer side, two sides rectangle. And they did. So I went something like that. So then, okay, kind of like wise guys, I said, okay, I like spirals. So do a spiral. So they formed formed in a cylinder, and it was a rough approximation of a spiral, but it was
Mm-hmm.
still a spiral. And I said, okay, I got it. Um, my mind could communicate with them, and they want to communicate with me, and we just have to get used to the idea that these creatures out there have an interest in interacting with people who are nice with them and believe that they might be relatable. And so you can believe they might be,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you got to see if they are. So that's why I did that spiral thing.
See, and yeah, and I'm going to respect your time and let you go, but I'm glad you ended it that way because again, I was thinking but I need to challenge you again though, but you have to be open and believe that you can actually communicate with someone other than a human being and another person would think, you're not you're full of
Well, you heard me tell you that I thought Snapper said, "Where have you been?" I mean,
yeah.
I got that early.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I know. Oh, that story is always that's a lasting one. And like honestly, like I appreciate you so much for giving me your time today. I respect your work so much, and um, I'm so glad you wrote this book because I think it's sort of a bridge between these realists and like agnostics and optimistic and pessimism, like it brings all of this sort of together, and it's not just spiritual, it's more than that. And I think I hope today's discussion really starts getting people a little bit more curious about this. And one other thing I want to just add here is I think what's so beautiful about this, at least what helps me so much and grounds me, is that we're not alone. And some people suffer so much from loneliness. Um, we saw that so much during COVID, but we're never alone. And I hope that this might help some people realize that.
I think it's good to be alone. I think it's good to be alone. You need to be able to be alone, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely.
Yes, exactly, which is what you just described here. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for ending it that way.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, have a wonderful rest of your holiday, and for everyone else, I'll see you here next week. Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last, because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye-bye.